The Incredible Theft by Agatha Christie. The conversation at the dinner table was animated. It was a small party. Lord Mayfield, host and master of the house, was a man of about 50. He had a fine head, a powerful, well-cut face, and an air of command. He was a man of energy, a man of action, a man who had made his own way in the world. Beside him sat Mrs. Agatha, a woman of formidable appearance and even more formidable conversation. She was a woman who was interested in everything: social reform, the housing of the poor, the education of the young. On the other side of Lord Mayfield sat Mrs. Vanderlyn. Mrs. Vanderlyn was a very different type. She was a woman of great beauty, a woman of charm, a woman of mystery. She was a woman who had lived much in the world and who knew it well. The other members of the party were Sir George Carrington, a man of 55 with a tired, kind face; his wife, Lady Julia, a woman who had been a great beauty in her day and who was still a very attractive woman; and their son, Reggie, a young man of 25 with a pleasant, rather weak face. The dinner was excellent. The wine was good. The conversation was, as has been said, animated. It was not until the end of dinner, when the servants had left the room and the port was going its rounds, that the subject which was in everyone's mind was mentioned. It was Mrs. Agatha who mentioned it. "I hear, Lord Mayfield," she said, "that you're interested in the new bomber." There was a sudden silence. Lord Mayfield's face did not change. He continued to peel an orange with great care. "The new bomber?" he said. "I am interested in all new developments in aviation." "But this is something special, isn't it?" said Mrs. Agatha. "A new type of bomber that is going to revolutionize warfare." "I think," said Lord Mayfield, "that the newspapers have been exaggerating." "Oh, no," said Mrs. Agatha. "I have it on the best authority." "Indeed," said Lord Mayfield. "And what is your authority?" "I cannot tell you that," said Mrs. Agatha, "but I can assure you that it is a very good one." "I am sure it is," said Lord Mayfield. He turned to Mrs. Vanderlyn. "And you, Mrs. Vanderlyn," he said, "are you interested in bombers?" Mrs. Vanderlyn smiled. "I am interested in everything that is beautiful," she said. "And a bomber is not beautiful." "No," said Lord Mayfield. "It is not beautiful. It is a machine of destruction." "And yet," said Mrs. Vanderlyn, "there's a beauty in machines, a beauty of power." "Yes," said Lord Mayfield, "there is a beauty of power." He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned to Sir George Carrington. "And you, Carrington," he said, "what do you think of the new bomber?" Sir George Carrington started. "Ah," he said, "I think it is a very interesting development." "A very interesting development," repeated Lord Mayfield. He rose. "Shall we go into the drawing-room?" he said. In the drawing-room, the conversation was more general, but it was clear that the subject of a new bomber was still in everyone's mind. Lord Mayfield did not stay long. After a few minutes, he excused himself and went to his study. The study was a large, comfortable room lined with books. On a large desk in the middle of the room were a number of papers. Lord Mayfield sat down at the desk and began to read. He had been reading for about half an hour when there was a knock at the door. "Come in," said Lord Mayfield. The door opened and a young man entered. He was a tall, thin young man with a pale, clever face and a nervous manner. This was Carlyle, Lord Mayfield's secretary. "I am sorry to disturb you, Lord Mayfield," he said, "but there is something I think you ought to see." He held out a paper. Lord Mayfield took it and read it. His face darkened. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "It was in the Evening Post," said Carlyle. Lord Mayfield sat for a moment in silence, looking at the paper. Then he looked up at Carlyle. "Have you mentioned this to anyone?" he asked. "No," Lord Mayfield, said Carlyle. Good, said Lord Mayfield. See that you don't. He put the paper in a drawer and locked it. And now, he said, let's get to work. Have you got the plans? Yes, Lord Mayfield, said Carlyle. He went to a large safe in the corner of the room and opened it. He took out a roll of papers and brought them to the desk. Lord Mayfield unrolled the papers and began to study them. They were the plans of the new bomber. For the next 2 hours, the two men worked in silence. The only sound in the room was the ticking of a large clock on the mantelpiece and the occasional rustle of paper. It was nearly midnight when Lord Mayfield rose and stretched himself. That will do for tonight, Carlyle, he said. We have made good progress. Yes, Lord Mayfield, said Carlyle. He began to roll up the papers. Leave them there, said Lord Mayfield. I want to have one last look at them before I go to bed. Very well, Lord Mayfield, said Carlyle. He left the room. Lord Mayfield sat down at the desk again and began to study the plans once more. He was so absorbed in his work that he did not hear the door open. He did not hear the soft footsteps on the carpet. It was not until a voice spoke that he realized he was not alone. A very interesting piece of work, Lord Mayfield, said the voice. Lord Mayfield started and looked up. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Vanderlyn. Lord Mayfield's hand made a sudden instinctive movement to cover the papers on the desk. Then, realizing the futility of the action, he let it fall. He looked at Mrs. Vanderlyn with a cold, level gaze. I thought you had gone to bed, Mrs. Vanderlyn, he said. The night is so beautiful, she replied. I went out for a little stroll on the terrace. And then I saw your light, and I thought I would come and say good night. She came slowly into the room. Her evening dress of shimmering silver seemed to catch and hold the light. She looked at the plans on the desk. And so these are the famous plans, she said. They are some private papers, said Lord Mayfield. Oh, don't be so discreet, she said with a little laugh. Everyone knows about the new bomber. And everyone knows that you are the man who is going to make it a success. You are very kind, said Lord Mayfield. I'm not kind, she said. I'm only interested. I have always been interested in power. And these plans, they represent power, don't they? They represent a great deal of hard work, said Lord Mayfield. And a great deal of money, she added. She looked at him for a moment. Her eyes were dark and mocking. I wonder, she said, how much they are worth. They are not for sale, said Lord Mayfield. Everything is for sale, she said. It is only a question of the price. I think, Mrs. Vanderlyn, said Lord Mayfield, that you are mistaken. Perhaps, she said. She turned to the door. Good night, Lord Mayfield, she said. Good night, he replied. He watched her leave the room. Then he turned back to the desk. But he did not begin to work again. He sat for a long time, staring at the plans. There was another knock at the door. Come in, he said. This time it was Sir George Carrington. He looked tired and worried. I saw your light, Mayfield, he said. I thought I'd come in for a moment. Sit down, George, said Lord Mayfield. Sir George sat down. He looked at the plans on the desk. Still at it? He said. There's a lot to do, said Lord Mayfield. I suppose there is, said Sir George. He was silent for a moment. Then he looked at Lord Mayfield. Mayfield, he said, I'm worried. About what? Asked Lord Mayfield. About the new bomber, said Sir George. There are rumors. There are always rumors, said Lord Mayfield. But these are more than rumors, said Sir George. They say that there's a leak, that someone is selling information. Who says that? Asked Lord Mayfield. I can't tell you, said Sir George, but it comes from a very reliable source. I see, said Lord Mayfield. He was silent for a moment. Then he looked at Sir George. And what do you want me to do? He asked. I want you to be careful, said Sir George. Very careful. I'm always careful, said Lord Mayfield. I know you are, said Sir George. But this is different. This is serious. I realize that, said Lord Mayfield. Well, said Sir George, rising, I'll leave you to it. Good night, Mayfield. Good night, George, said Lord Mayfield. He was alone once more. Lord Mayfield's hand made a sudden instinctive movement to cover the papers on the desk. Then, realizing the futility of the action, he let it fall. He looked at Mrs. Vanderlyn with a cold, level gaze. I thought you had gone to bed, Mrs. Vanderlyn, he said. The night is so beautiful, she replied. I went out for a little stroll on the terrace, and then I saw your light, and I thought I would come and say good night. She came slowly into the room. Her evening dress of shimmering silver seemed to catch and hold the light. She looked at the plans on the desk. And so these are the famous plans, she said. They are some private papers, said Lord Mayfield. Oh, don't be so discreet, she said with a little laugh. Everyone knows about the new bomber, and everyone knows that you are the man who is going to make it a success. You are very kind, said Lord Mayfield. I am not kind, she said. I am only interested. I have always been interested in power. And these plans, they represent power, don't they? They represent a great deal of hard work, said Lord Mayfield. And a great deal of money, she added. She looked at him for a moment. Her eyes were dark and mocking. I wonder, she said, how much they are worth. They are not for sale, said Lord Mayfield. Everything is for sale, she said. It is only a question of the price. I think, Mrs. Vanderlyn, said Lord Mayfield, that you are mistaken. Perhaps, she said. She turned to the door. Good night, Lord Mayfield, she said. Good night, he replied. He watched her leave the room. Then he turned back to the desk. But he did not begin to work again. He sat for a long time, staring at the plans. There was another knock at the door. Come in, he said. This time it was Sir George Carrington. He looked tired and worried. I saw your light, Mayfield, he said. I thought I'd come in for a moment. Sit down, George, said Lord Mayfield. Sir George sat down. He looked at the plans on the desk. Still at it? He said. There's a lot to do, said Lord Mayfield. I suppose there is, said Sir George. He was silent for a moment. Then he looked at Lord Mayfield. Mayfield, he said, I'm worried. About what? Asked Lord Mayfield. About the new bomber, said Sir George. There are rumors. There are always rumors, said Lord Mayfield. But these are more than rumors, said Sir George. They say that there's a leak, that someone is selling information. Who says that? Asked Lord Mayfield. I can't tell you, said Sir George, but it comes from a very reliable source. I see, said Lord Mayfield. He was silent for a moment. Then he looked at Sir George. And what do you want me to do? He asked. I want you to be careful, said Sir George. Very careful. I'm always careful, said Lord Mayfield. I know you are, said Sir George. But this is different. This is serious. I realize that, said Lord Mayfield. Well, said Sir George, rising, I'll leave you to it. Good night, Mayfield. Good night, George, said Lord Mayfield. He was alone once more. Oh. Everything is for sale. It is only a question of the price. Oh. 4. Lord Mayfield straightened up slowly. His face was pale, and his eyes were hard. He looked at his secretary for a long moment before speaking. Carlyle, he said, and his voice was dangerously quiet. Did you come back into this room after I told you to go to bed? The young man's eyes widened. He seemed to shrink back against the doorframe. No, Lord Mayfield. I went straight to my room. I only came down now because I thought I heard a sound, a window closing perhaps. A window, Lord Mayfield turned sharply toward the casement he had opened only minutes before. The curtains swayed slightly in the night breeze. The window was open. I opened it myself. Then perhaps it was a footstep I heard, Carlyle stammered. Is something wrong, sir? One of the papers is gone, Carlyle. The most important one. The technical summary of the interceptor's range. Carlyle gasped, his face turning a shade paler. Gone? But that's impossible. It was on the desk when I left. You were sitting right there, Lord Mayfield. I know where I was sitting. Mayfield snapped. I went to the window for less than 2 minutes. When I turned back, it was gone. Carlyle stepped into the room, his eyes darting frantically over the desk. Could it have blown away? The wind. I have searched the floor, the safe, and every inch of this desk, Mayfield interrupted. It did not blow away. It was taken. He walked toward the secretary, his shadow looming large on the wall. Tell me, Carlyle, did you meet anyone in the hall? Mrs. Vanderlyn? Sir George? No one, sir. The house was like a grave. A grave, Mayfield repeated bitterly. A very apt description. If that paper is not recovered, it will be the grave of more than one reputation. He went to the telephone on the desk and paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. What are you going to do? Lord Mayfield? Carlyle asked in a hushed voice. There is a man, Mayfield said, as if talking to himself. A man Sir George mentioned earlier this evening. He is staying nearby, in the village of Chobham. A foreigner, but they say he has a mind like a needle. You mean a detective, sir? I mean Hercule Poirot, said Lord Mayfield. He picked up the receiver. And God help us if he cannot find what has been lost this night. It was not until the following morning that Hercule Poirot arrived. He stepped out of the car, a small, precise figure in a perfectly tailored overcoat, his mustache waxed to a point that could have defied a compass. Lord Mayfield was waiting for him in the hall, looking as though he had not slept a wink. Monsieur Poirot, Mayfield said, stepping forward. I cannot tell you how grateful I am that you came so quickly. Poirot bowed, his eyes taking in every detail of the magnificent hall. In matters of such urgency, my lord, one does not linger over the coffee. You mention a theft? A theft that is incredible? Beyond belief, Mayfield replied. He led Poirot toward the study. The room was secure. I was present, and yet, in the space of 2 minutes, the most vital document in the country vanished into thin air. They entered the study. Carlyle was there, looking like a ghost of his former self, hovering by the safe. This is my secretary, Mr. Carlyle, Mayfield introduced. Poirot nodded curtly to the young man, then walked straight to the large desk by the window. He did not touch anything. He simply stood, his head slightly to one side, like a robin observing a worm. The window, it was open, you say? Poirot asked, his voice melodic yet piercing. I opened it myself, Mayfield explained. The heat was oppressive. I stood there, looking out at the terrace. When I turned back, it was gone. Poirot stepped to the window and looked out. The terrace was wide and paved with stone. Beyond it, the garden stretched into the morning mist. And the terrace, it was empty. I thought I saw a shadow, Mayfield admitted, a figure moving away toward the trees. But I cannot be sure. My eyes, they are not what they were in the moonlight. Poirot turned back to the room. He walked to the middle of the floor and looked at the carpet. Then he looked at the desk. Finally, he looked at Carlyle. And you, Monsieur le Secrétaire, you heard the cry of the ghost, perhaps, or the step of the intruder. Carlyle shook his head nervously. I heard a sound, monsieur, like a window being closed. But Lord Mayfield says he did not close it. Extremement interesant, Poirot murmured. He began to pace the room with short, rhythmic steps. A theft that happens while the owner is in the room. A shadow on the terrace. A secretary who hears sounds that did not happen. It is a symphony of contradictions. He stopped and looked at Lord Mayfield. Tell me, my lord, who else is in this house? I wish to see the guest list. For in a crime that is impossible, one must look at the people who make it possible. The breakfast room was bathed in morning sunlight, but the atmosphere remained chilled. Lord Mayfield had introduced Poirot to the assembled company, and now the little detective stood back, observing the players in this drama with his sharp, bird-like eyes. Mrs. Macata was the first to break the silence. She looked at Poirot with a mixture of curiosity and profound disapproval. A private detective, she said, her voice booming across the table. In my opinion, Lord Mayfield, the official police should have been summoned hours ago. This secrecy is quite unnecessary. Poirot bowed with exaggerated politeness. Madam, the official police are like the heavy artillery. They are excellent for the open battle. But for the, shall we say, delicate embroidery of a mystery, such as this, one sometimes requires a finer needle. Reggie Carrington, looking somewhat disheveled and nursing a cup of very black coffee, allowed a short, nervous laugh. A finer needle? I say, that's a good one. Personally, I think the whole thing is a nightmare. I mean, who'd want to steal a lot of dry technical drawings? Someone who knows their value, young man, Sir George Carrington said quietly. He was standing by the sideboard, his back to the room. Poirot turned his gaze toward Lady Julia. She was sitting very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had not touched her breakfast. And you, milady? Poirot asked softly. You slept well? You heard nothing in the night. Lady Julia started, her eyes meeting Poirot's for a fleeting second before she looked away. I slept fitfully. The house was very quiet. I heard nothing at all. Nothing at all, Poirot repeated, almost to himself. Not even the closing of a window, or a footstep on the terrace. Nothing, she insisted. At that moment, Mrs. Vanderlyn entered the room. She was perfectly dressed in a crisp morning suit, her golden hair glowing in the sun. She looked refreshed, radiant, and entirely unconcerned. Good morning, everyone, she said, her voice like silk. I hear we have a celebrity among us. Monsieur Poirot, I have heard so much of your, how do you say, little gray cells. Poirot's eyes twinkled. They are at your service, madam, as I hope you will be at theirs. Mrs. Vanderlyn laughed, a light musical sound. But I am a woman of no importance. I know nothing of bombers or blueprints. I only know that I slept like a babe and dreamed of nothing but sunshine. A happy state, Poirot murmured. But sometimes, madam, the most beautiful dreams are the ones that hide the truth. He turned back to Lord Mayfield. My lord, the stage is set. The actors have spoken their first lines. Now, if you please, I should like to speak with each of them, in private. The interviews took place in the small morning room. Poirot sat behind a mahogany table, his notebook open, though he rarely glanced at it. His first subject was Mrs. Macata. You say, madam, that you retired at 11? Poirot began, his eyes fixed on her formidable face. Precisely at 11, Mrs. Macata replied. I am a woman of regular habits. I find that the brain requires 8 hours of undisturbed repose. In your room, it is near the stairs? It is. And if you're suggesting that I heard anything, Monsieur Poirot, you are mistaken. I am a heavy sleeper. My conscience is clear, and therefore my rest is deep. Poirot bowed. A clear conscience is the best pillow, so they say. But what of Mrs. Vanderlyn? You have an opinion of her, no doubt. Mrs. Macata sniffed. A woman of that type always has an opinion attached to her. She's a parasite, monsieur. She lives on the admiration of men and, I suspect, information that does not belong to her. Why Lord Mayfield invited her is a mystery to me. Next came Reggie Carrington. He looked even more nervous than he had at breakfast. He kept glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst in. "Mr. Carrington," Poirot said pleasantly. "You play the bridge, I understand. Last night, you played with your mother, Mrs. Macata, and Mrs. Vanderlyn." "Yes, that's right. Rotten game, too. I couldn't concentrate." "And why was that? Was it the beauty of Mrs. Vanderlyn that distracted you?" Reggie flushed. "She's a very attractive woman. Any man would be distracted. But look here, Poirot, what's all this about? You don't think I had anything to do with those plans, do you? I wouldn't know a bomber from a bus." "I do not think you were a spy, Mr. Carrington," Poirot said dryly. "But I think you were a young man with, shall we say, certain complications." Reggie opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. He looked thoroughly miserable. Finally, Poirot sent for Lady Julia. She entered the room with a regal air, but her hands were trembling. "Milady," Poirot said, his voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper, "you are worried about your son. Is it not so?" Lady Julia stiffened. "I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot." "I think you do. You think that Reggie, in his, how shall we say, infatuation for Mrs. Vanderlyn, might have been persuaded to do something foolish, something dangerous. Reggie is a good boy," she cried, her composure suddenly shattering. "He is weak, perhaps, and he owes money, a great deal of money, but he is not a thief." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "you went downstairs last night after the bridge was over. You went to find him, did you not?" "I went to get a book," she insisted, her voice rising. "I saw no one. I heard nothing. I simply got my book and went back to bed." Poirot looked at her for a long time. His expression was unreadable. "The book," he said at last. "A most useful thing, a book. It explains so many late-night walks." The clock on the mantelpiece struck the hour. Poirot stood by the desk, his hands behind his back, looking at the faces of those assembled before him. Lord Mayfield sat in his high-backed chair, his face a mask of iron. Sir George and Lady Julia stood by the window, while Reggie hovered nervously near the door. "Messrs, mesdames," Poirot began, his voice quiet but commanding. "We are here to solve a riddle that is called incredible. A theft that took place while the victim was in the room. A theft with a shadow on the terrace and a vanished paper." He turned toward Lady Julia. "Milady, you believed your son to be the thief. You saw his infatuation with Mrs. Vanderlyn. You knew of his debts, and you feared he had been coerced. You were prepared to protect him at any cost, even to strike a bargain with me, to return the papers in secret." Lady Julia gasped, her hand flying to her throat. I only wanted—" "You wanted to save a son who was not a thief," Poirot interrupted gently. "For while Reggie Carrington was indeed distracted last night, it was not by the plans of a bomber. He was, shall we say, enjoying a brief flirtation with Mrs. Vanderlyn's maid on the back stairs." Reggie turned bright red and stared at his boots. A heavy silence fell over the room. "Then who?" Lord Mayfield demanded, his voice rasping. "If not the agent, if not the boy, who took them?" Poirot stepped closer to the desk. "There are only two possibilities, my lord. Either the secretary, Mr. Carlyle, took them, which would be illogical, as he could have copied them at his leisure, or they were taken by the only other person who had access to this desk at that exact moment." Poirot's eyes locked on a Lord Mayfield's. "They were in your pocket, my lord. All the time." The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Mayfield did not move. He seemed to have turned to stone. "You are a very clever man, Lord Mayfield," Poirot continued. "You staged the theft. You invented the shadow on the terrace to shield Carlyle from suspicion. You needed the papers to vanish so that you could hand them to Mrs. Vanderlyn in exchange for a certain letter, a letter from your past that threatened your career." Mayfield's shoulders slumped. The mask of iron finally broke. "You have guessed it all, Monsieur Poirot, down to the last detail. I suppose you think me a common traitor." Poirot shook his head. "No, my lord. I think you are a man of rare intelligence. For even as you save yourself from ruin, you played a double game. You are a brilliant engineer. I suspect the plans you handed over contained minor adjustments. Adjustments so subtle that no foreign expert will realize why the bomber fails to perform as expected until it is far too late." Lord Mayfield looked up, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You are too clever, Monsieur Poirot. Yes, I saved myself and served my country with the same stroke." "My lord," said Poirot, bowing low, "if you could not kill two birds with one stone, you would not be a politician.